I was really kind of
All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the actual 5-year anniversary of the meetup. I just realized. 5 years ago, we met at Ginger Man for the first meetup. I think there was, you may have been there. At least one or two of us were there. Anybody else was the first? It was actually one of the biggest ones. There was like 60 or 70 people, and then like it took like 4.9 years to get back up to that. But, yeah, exactly. In a smaller room. But, yeah, we should be back in this room more or less indefinitely now. This is definitely a lot better than across the way. They assured me they wouldn't accidentally overbook this room again. So, in case you don't know how to get around, if you go out the main door and then just like in that corner, there's the bathrooms. Like, if you just kind of follow the side of the hotel, you'll find them. If you need on the Wi-Fi, it's Capital Factory Guest. And as far as parking, if you park in the garage downstairs, if you park after 6, they give you a 50% off voucher. You can ask the front desk at the Capital Factory for. And somebody's up here at the front desk all evening.
What about after 5 now?
The website said after 6 when I checked today. So last time I parked before. I think it was after 5 before 6, and I ended up paying like over $30, I think, because it's a lot of money. So. The only other thing I want to mention, as always, we have a code of conduct, and
parking tickets are like $30.
Sorry?
Parking tickets are like $30.
Parking tickets? I think?
Yeah, like you can park like on the street like illegally.
worse than that.
You can pay early, so.
I recommend parking on the street using the Park X app because you can pay for it on your phone and re-up it if you need to stay longer. That's what I usually do. Anyway, we have a code of conduct. We've never had to add a violation of it. Nobody's ever reported anything, but pretty standard stuff. We're a pretty good community, so I don't think we're going to break it. But there is the Go Community Code of Conduct. You can look that up. There's reporting things on there as well. Sponsorship is Auth0. This is Otto. He's our guest speaker tonight. He's traveling in. Auth0 provided the money to cover all the pizza and the drinks, all the beer and water. So definitely thank Otto for his company providing all that stuff. And Otto, would you mind telling us a little bit about Auth0 and if you are hiring?
Absolutely. We are hiring for all sorts of positions. We currently use Go at the company very little, but we're hoping to use it more and more. So Go developers definitely, we're looking for you. Our company is mainly a Node.js based backend. And for how many of you guys know about Auth0 and what we do? Okay, so about half the room. For those of you guys who have never heard of us, what we do is basically identity and authentication as a service. So rather than you building your own login page, your own reset password page, your own user identity, we can handle all of that for you, whether you're building a Go application, a Node application, or whatever framework you're working with. So that's basically our sales pitch.
And do you have any current openings that
So auth0.com/careers, we have all of our open positions. We're looking for a lot of engineers, a lot of infrastructure guys. So if that fits you, definitely check out. I don't have the full list here, but we are hiring.
Sweet. And speaking of jobs, is anybody in the community, do you have any openings in your companies or anything you'd like to share?
I'm Josh. I work at Building Engine. I'm a development engineer. We're hiring for pretty much every position under the sun. We do use Go, especially for the workloads we're moving into Kubernetes. So if you want to do cool stuff and not actually have to work with WordPress and Promise.
My name is Trevor Khan. I work for Dell, and we have a brand new IoT organization that's starting up. We have an open source platform called EdgeX Foundry, edgexfoundry.org. It was originally written in Java, but we're porting it all to Go so that it can run on our small engagement devices, edge gateways, and things like that. So we definitely need to build.
Jeff?
My name is Peyton Whitebush, and I'm a company called Verops that sells simulation tracking tools. And the tools are written in Go, and I'm also looking for potentially Go programmers, JavaScript programmers.
What's the name of the company?
It's called Verops, VEROPS.
Anybody else? Cool. So talk to those people after the meetup if you're looking for a job. I think that's all the things I wanted to cover. Does anybody have any questions before we get on started? Any more announcements, Trevor, by chance? What's next month?
Next month we have Jeffrey Boycott talking about his journey of making a testing tool that implicated the ASC package. So he's going to go through some pretty interesting stuff about this sort of coverage for you. So that's next month. And then in May we're pretty much May and June I think we're fairly settled. But July and August, we're looking for people who want to talk. If you've never given a talk before, we're going to help you out with that, maybe sort of a little bit through the process. But it's been great this year, and last year we had quite a few people from the community. So don't be shy. If you built a thing, you want to talk about something that's cool or something that you learned. I love people discussing like what they learned on their kind of strange journey to build something from scratch to understand. So definitely come talk to me, talk to Pound ATX and go for Slack. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, definitely always looking for speakers. So without further ado, Otto is going to present to us a talk on JSON.
Awesome. Thank you. So before I get started, how many of you guys are Go developers in your regular jobs or hobby developers? So almost everybody. How many of you guys have heard of or worked with JSON Web Tokens in the past? Okay, so almost everyone again. So then this talk should be fairly easy. How many of you guys have built Go APIs with JSON Web Tokens? One guy, two guys. Okay, so my talk today is titled Securing Go APIs with JSON Web Tokens. And I had a really cool demo to show you guys that, on an application that I've been working on my own time. And this morning it totally crapped out on me. My environment got destroyed. So I spent half the day trying to figure it out, and I couldn't, so I have to do a backup demo at the end of this talk, so I'm just going to preface it with that, so it's not going to be as in-depth as I would have liked, but happy to talk to you guys afterwards on Go, JSON Web Token, security, whatever you guys want. Just a little bit about me. My name is Otto Kukic, and I work as a developer evangelist at OutZero, where we do basically identity as a service. And as a dev evangelist, I go out to meetups, to conferences, and talk to developers like you to see what we can do better to make authentication, make identity easier for you guys, and just kind of get a pulse on the developer community. If you have any questions or any feedback that you can tell me after the talk because we don't have time, feel free to email me at otto@outzero or follow me on Twitter at @otto, and I'll be happy to follow up. So, for those of you guys that aren't familiar with what JSON Web Tokens are, I'm going to do a very brief, abridged introduction to what they are, how they work, and why we use them. So, basically, on the screen here is a representation of a basic JSON Web Token. And to the naked eye, it doesn't really mean much. It doesn't look like anything. It's just a random string of characters. If we look at that JSON Web Token a little bit closer, we can see that it has three different parts. The part in red is the header, the part in purple is the payload of the token, and the part in blue is the signature. So the header of the JSON Web Token basically just contains data that tells you what type of, what you're looking at, and basically you're looking at a JSON Web Token. And then the other key piece of information that's always in a valid JSON Web Token is its signing algorithm. So what hashing algorithm was used to sign the token. So that's, nothing too interesting there. The really important part of a JSON Web Token is its payload. And the payload of the token is data and claims and information that you want to state about your application. So JSON Web Tokens are used to transmit messages, transmit data from one client to the other. And in this payload, you define what that message is going to be. And it's going to be in the format, it's basically JSON format. So any valid JSON that you write is, you can put in this payload, transmit it to your backend, your front end, wherever you're sending these tokens. When it comes to the payload of the JSON Web Token, there's really three parts, or I guess there's really three types of claims you can make. There's reserved claims, and these were defined by the CFP that kind of brought the JSON Web Token standard to life. And those claims are like the SUB claim for subject, basically the user ID, the IAT claim, which stands for issued at when this token was generated. And then the second type of claim you can make are public claims. And when it comes to public claims, these are more meant for interoperability with other APIs, with other clients. So the examples I have here are given name and family name. You might be tempted to put, first name and last name to represent your user information, but if you wanted to kind of follow standards and have your API work really well with, all the other identity providers or all the other clients that might consume your API, then following these conventions is really good. And then finally, we have private claims. And private claims are claims that are specific to your application domain. So these claims, you represent them however you want. They only mean something to you and nothing to anybody else. So for example, the role attribute I have here is set as speaker. And I have it set as speaker in a string format. But if I wanted to represent it as an integer, 1 for speaker, 2 for attendee, 3 for organizer, I could do that as well. Or if I didn't even want to represent a role like this, if I wanted to do a series of permissions, I could pass in an array saying, this person can, plug in their HDMI and give the talk, this person can take notes, and so on and so forth. So those are the three types of claims that you could put in your payload. And the final part of the JSON Web Token, the perhaps most important part, is its signature. And what the signature does is it ensures that your token comes from a trusted source. It ensures that the token that your backend server is going to validate was generated by a trusted party that you entrusted with generating the token. So if you're using like traditional cookie-based, session-based authentication, usually when a user logs in, you're going to issue them a session ID from your service, from the service that they logged into. When it comes to JSON Web Tokens, you can have a third-party service like Auth0 issue the token. You can have your server issue the token. You can have a microservice that its sole purpose is to issue tokens. So this kind of gives you that flexibility of implementing tokens and having them generated from wherever you want, and then your service just has to validate them. Now, the signature here that I'm showing is using the HMAC SHA-256, and the way we get the signature is we take the header of the payload, the header of the token, the payload of the token, and we encode it with a string-based password. So here I'm using the password super secret password. So now when I generate this token, I'm going to send it to my browser or an application that's going to exchange this token for my backend service to access my Go API. And when this token is sent back to my application, if I don't, if I'm not verifying it against the super secret password that I set, the token's going to be invalid. And the other important thing when it comes to tokens is they are signed, they're not encrypted. So as most of you guys probably know, don't put any sensitive information in the token because anybody can, these are just, the first two parts are just base64 URL encoded strings, so anybody can easily decode them and see what's in it. So how do tokens work with a traditional application? So say, you're building a modern application, you have a really cool Go backend API, and you have a React or Angular or Vue.js front-end client. The user's going to come to your application in the browser, they're going to log in, and again, they can log in via via your Go server, they can log in via third parties, but they're going to log in and authenticate. And once the server is satisfied that they identified who they are, they give the correct password, the server is going to issue them a JSON Web Token, and it's going to send it to the browser. Now, you're going to take that JSON Web Token, and you're going to send it with any subsequent request to your backend API. And your server, for every request you send, you're going to have to send this JSON Web Token in an authorization header, and your backend is going to validate it every single time that this token is, it's not expired, it has the correct signature, it has the correct, roles and permission that you defined. And if any of those are false, we're going to return an error, a 401, a 403, whatever's appropriate. So that's basically how JSON Web Tokens work with, in a traditional high-level architecture. Now, you may be saying that, I just want to write Go code. I don't really care about these hashing algorithms and how I sign the token, how I get the token. I'm not a cybersecurity expert. And how many of you guys would say that you are working in security or a cybersecurity expert? One guy. So the good thing about JSON Web Tokens in Go is that there are a lot of really well-tested, really well-implemented libraries that implement the Go Web Standard, or the JSON Web Token standard. And here I'm just showing one made by Dave, who works at Fitstar. They're using Go for a lot of stuff. And when he was working there, a JSON Web Token implementation didn't exist, so he wrote one. And his works really great. I've used it personally in a bunch of applications. And to generate a new token on the back end, you basically import the library. There's create a new token with claims, specify the hashing algorithm, HS256, define your payload, your claims, and then sign the token with your super secure password, pass the token along to the front end. Very, very simple, and there's a bunch of different libraries that can do this with varying levels of features and functionality. So, as I mentioned earlier, JSON Web Tokens, they're signed, they're not encrypted, so anything in them, anybody can read. But if you needed to encrypt these tokens, if you needed to have JSON Web Tokens that are unreadable to somebody that might intercept it, there's another set of standards called Jose, which actually isn't a developer's name. It stands for JavaScript Object Signing and Encryption. So it's a whole set of libraries for JSON Web Token encryption, and it's a little bit out of the scope of this talk, but if you need to do more with tokens than just sign them and validate them, there's all these libraries that you can look at and use. So the next part I wanted to talk about is how to best use these tokens in your Go applications. And when I come from a mainly Node.js background where I wrote a lot of Node code. I wrote a lot of using Express. So working with Express middleware was super easy, super straightforward. And when I started writing Go code, I hated the way that we were passing around handlers. I just didn't like the format of it. So the first thing I did was look at different libraries, look at different implementations that would allow me to do kind of what I wanted to do in the way I wanted to do it. And the solution that I came up with was not to use a big framework like Gin or Revel or Pico. I kind of wanted to do my own thing as a learning experience. So I landed upon Gorilla, the Gorilla package. They have a whole bunch of really good, I'm sure you guys know, a whole lot of really good utilities. So Gorilla Mux for the routing, and then Negroni for my middleware handler. And the next thing I did was create a struct for all of my routes in my API. So 4 attributes here, the method, so get, put, post, delete. The path, so basically the endpoint for my Go API, what it's going to look like. And then finally, a slice or array of Negroni handler middleware functions. So here I would have a middleware for authentication, for authorization. So one to validate the token, one to make sure that this token had the claims that I'm expecting, and then one, maybe another one to validate that the user can actually take this action, can call this API. So you can do all of that with, embedded in the JSON Web Token, so you don't have to do a whole bunch of database lookups to see if the user has this permission. And then finally, the actual handler, which does the functionality of that endpoint. So I have a whole bunch of routes defined, and here I think I was building like a review aggregator, so just 2 sample routes. One that has the authenticated middleware and one that doesn't have any middleware at all. So for the first one, when a user hits my API, hits the reviews slash whatever UUID they send me, I'll check to see whether they're authenticated or not. If they are, I'll go and get that review, give them the information. If they're not authenticated, if they don't have a valid JSON Web Token, I'm just going to short circuit the request there and say you need to be logged in. You don't have permission to do this. For other endpoints that are basically public, so like the info endpoint, which just tells you what version the API is on, or just some standard information that doesn't have to be protected, I just don't pass in any middleware at all, and it just calls that handler as soon as that request is made. And my authenticated middleware, I feel like this is an old slide, and this isn't exactly how I have it working, but I guess maybe it's a little bit of pseudocode. But basically, in the authenticated middleware, and then I know I took out all the error handling here, but basically, when a request comes in, the first thing I look for is whether or not it has an authorization token, and if this authorization token has a valid JSON Web Token. If it doesn't, right off the bat, I know this isn't a request that I trust, that I want to fulfill, so I'll short circuit it. Then if I do have a token, I'm going to parse that token, look at the signing method, make sure it has all of the information that I'm expecting, and then I'm going to validate that token with my super secret password. So if I don't, if the token was signed with a different password, I'm going to know, so I can again short circuit the request. If it was, then I'll go and look at the actual claims to see if the user has permissions to do this action. And basically, if at any point they don't, I'm going to say you can't do it, respond with a forbidden message. And that's basically the authenticated middleware. So the next part would be to do like an authorized middleware to check, further check to see if they can take the action or not. So before I get into the quick demo that I have, just a few key takeaways. Go is really awesome for building APIs. I don't really like building Go applications that basically like traditional web applications with Go. I feel like a lot of the other frameworks do template handling a lot better. But for building Go APIs, building RESTful APIs, Go is my go-to every single time. Gorilla Mux and Negroni for me, gave me really powerful routing and middleware management. And then finally, JSON Web Tokens allow me to very painlessly secure the API. So with that said, let's get into a quick demo of how this works in practice. So basically, I have a very simple application here. It's just one main.go file. And I have an environment file that basically is going to tell us what API I'm talking to and where my token is going to be issued from. So I'll use .0 to issue the token because I don't want to issue the token myself. I don't trust myself to code it properly. So once, before I get into the routes that I have this JWT middleware that basically does what I talked to you guys about a second ago. Except here, as part of the OpenID Connect standard and just following good practices, you always want to ensure that you check the audience attribute of the JSON Web Token. So to see where it's coming from, and if it's an audience that you let sign the tokens for you. So first of all, check the audience, and then afterwards, the audience is the API. Sorry, I got to mix that for a second. So the audience is your specific API. So in this case, my audience is My audience is a Golang-sample, and my issuer is Auth0, my Auth0 penny. So it's going to check the audience, it's going to check the issuer claim, and then since I'm using the RS-256 signing algorithm here, instead of using a string-based password, I'm actually using a public-private key combo. So Auth0 is going to sign the token. You know, when they successfully issue a token, they're going to sign it with their private key. I'm going to download a public key and use the public key to validate the token. So here I have a helper function all the way at the bottom here that kind of goes out and gets that public key for me. And yeah, basically we run it through this middleware. It's going to validate whether the token is correct or not. And then we have our routes. So we have a public route, which basically is just going to send a message saying, you know, hello from the public endpoint, you don't need to be authenticated to access this, and anybody can hit this route and basically view the contents. Then we're going to have a second route called private, and with this route, you're going to have to be authenticated, you're going to have a valid token to be able to see the message hello from the private endpoint. And just to make things a little more complicated, we're going to have a third route called private-scoped. And what this route is going to do is it's also going to check to see if that token that was issued to you has the permission to read this particular message. So if it has the scope, the permission of read messages, it's going to issue the response. If it doesn't, then we're going to say you can't do this. And typically this is what the authorization middleware would be for. Just because I didn't, you know, my demo kind of crapped out, I kind of had to do all of this stuff inline, so you wouldn't do this in a real world application. But just to show you the scopes again, to checking that scope, we're basically going to take the token that comes in, granted there is a token, parse the claims out of it, and see if, so we're passing in read messages in our token, so we're going to get those claims, look at the scopes, and if that, if read messages is in there, we're going to process the request. If not, we're going to kick the user out. So here, I didn't build a backend for this either, or a front end, but basically I'm running on localhost 3010. I'm going to make a GET request to my public API. So doing that is going to serve the message that we expect. And right now, I'm not sending any additional headers. I'm not logged in, I'm not authenticated. But since this is a public endpoint, I can hit it as many times as I want, and I'll get the response I'm expecting. Now, if I were to try to call the, can you guys see this? Okay. Okay, so now I'm going to try to call the private API, and again, I'm not passing, or actually I do have an authorization right here, I'll just remove it. So now when I make this request, I'm going to get a message saying that the required authorization token was not found. So I'm not authenticated, I don't have a token, I didn't pass it along with my request. The Go service, the Go backend realized it and said, you can't do this, get out of here. And to get a token, I'm actually going to make a call to Auth0, and again, since I don't have a UI, it's going to be a little bit different, but basically I'm using the client credentials brand type, and I have my client secret that you would normally put in the back of your application. So if you were building like an Angular or React application, you would use a different flow. But for this one, I'm actually passing in my client ID, my secret, and then the audience of Golang sample. And to show you that, actually let's change this guy around. Let's just say I'm asking access to the Golang API, you know, assuming one exists. So I'll make this request, and service not enabled within domain Golang. Okay, so that's not going to work because our Auth0 backend is smart enough to realize that you can't request an audience that doesn't exist. But I think I have one to do this. This is the list of all my APIs. Let's do Angular. So now, oh, that's not authorized. Oh, because I didn't get permissions. Okay, well, let's just go back to Golang sample. So now we're going to make this request, and we got the token without any issues. And I can look at this token and just kind of look at the data that Auth0 sent us. Let's go to GPTIO, and we'll paste this token in here, and let me zoom it just a bit. So now you can see that the issuer for the token is autobot.auth0.com. We have a audience claim of Golang sample, when the token was issued, when it expires, and have the flow used to get it. So now we should be able to use this token and make that private request. We'll go here, private, and again, if we call this without passing the token, even though we got it in Postman, it's not going to do anything. But if we create an authorization header in the format of bearer, then paste in our token, now when we make the request, we get the message because we validated that the token was correct, that it came from a trusted source, and it wasn't expired. So we get the message, hello from a private endpoint. You need to be authenticated to see this, and we are, so we're able to see it. So now we do have this token, but that doesn't mean we have access to our entire application, our entire Go API. So if we were to try and call the private scope method, and here I'm going to do it without passing in any authorization headers, and we'll get that same message saying that you're not passing in an authorization token. But now if I do pass in a token,
You didn't get the key right.
sorry?
You didn't get the key right.
What am I missing? Oh, author. Thank you. Authorization. So bearer, we have our token again. We're going to make a request to the backend, and now instead of getting the message that we're expecting, we get the message insufficient scope. And the reason for that is because we, again, in this specific route, we are checking to see if our API has the scope read messages, but as we see here, we don't have a scope attribute at all. We don't have any scopes, so we're not going to be able to do that. To get around that, we can actually add a scope once a user is authenticated, and we can do this on the Go side. We can do, if we're using Auth0, we can do it on the Auth0 side, and basically the way that works is, turn it on here, and this is basically a webhook that, look at the code. So basically, once the token is generated, before it's sent to the client, we're going to look at that access token, get its scope, and then push the read messages claim on top of it. So we'll go back here and request a new token. Make sure we have all of our data correct. And we have a new token. And let's just look at what's inside this guy. Now we see that in our JSON Web Token, we have a scope of read messages. So we should be able to, with this token, talk to that private scope endpoint and get the right message. So let's go there. Private scope, headers, and we'll do authorization, their token, send it, and now we get the successful message of hello from a private endpoint, you need to be authenticated to see this. So in this demo, we used Auth0 to generate our tokens, but we could have just as easily had an endpoint in our Go application to validate user credentials, go to our own database, validate those user credentials, and then issue a token using any of the libraries I've shown here. Basically generate the token, have the same process for validating that token, and we would have a really secure Go API. That is all I had for my talk today. Any questions?
You have to log out or expire. How do the keys expire? That's the part I didn't see.
Oh, sure. So by default, we have an expiration date within the token, and by default with Auth0, we set it to 2 hours. So in 2 hours, this token is going to expire, and you're going to have to request a new one. Now, depending on the type of application you're building, say like you're building an Angular front end that talks to a Go back end, you would take these tokens and you could expire them in the browser, but that's not really the most secure way to handle things, especially if you're building SPA applications. If you're building SPA applications, you can't use a concept of refresh tokens to kind of extend the token's life cycle. So in that scenario, you basically have your authorization server keep the session state of the user if they log in, and every time they need a new JSON Web Token, you talk to the authorization service, ask them, is this user still logged in? And if they are, issue a new JSON Web Token. If you're building a traditional Go application, where you're not working with the SPA front end, or if you're building a mobile application, you can use refresh tokens that, your JSON Web Token will still expire in 2 hours, but you take the refresh token, you send it to your service, and you generate a new token based off of that refresh token.
Do you guys persist these JWTs in case you need to revoke their token manually?
So we do have the ability to revoke tokens on our side, but yeah, like when I first started at Auth0 2 years ago, what we recommended was if you were building SPA applications to keep your token in local storage, and that's not secure. We're not recommending that anymore. So we're keeping all of the user session on our side. So you can at any time call the logout method to log the user out. There's a blacklist method, so if you do need to revoke a token that might have gotten leaked, we can handle that for you as well.
So you guys don't recommend storing the JSON Web Token anymore in local storage?
No, you shouldn't store them anywhere really, not in local storage, not in session storage, not in cookie storage. If you absolutely must store them, we would recommend storing them like in memory. That way, when the session is refreshed, when the user visits in a new tab, that token doesn't exist anymore. It makes it much harder for a malicious party to extract that token. And we have a method on our side that if a user is logged in and they refresh the page, you can make a call. I think right now it's called check session. So you'll make a call to Auth0 to our authorization service, and we're gonna be able to tell if the user should be logged in at that device and issue a new JSON Web Token. So you're not without tokens, you're just not storing them permanently and persisting them in the browser.
So where do the tokens live?
They shouldn't live anywhere. They should be basically in your application, basically as like a one-time use, and then get new tokens. Which kind of sucks for the user experience. I mean, it's so much easier to store them in local storage, get them when you need them, but it's not secure.
What method do you use for identifying on a refresh?
So I don't have the code there, but basically when a user logs in, when we issue a token, we'll set a session ID based on that user's unique identifier. We'll set a nonce in the browser, and then we have a few other parameters that we track in the browser that are totally opaque to the user, that totally don't mean anything to anybody except our authorization service. So we have a way of figuring out if a user should be logged in on this particular device or not.
So how's that different than just old-fashioned session tracking and ignoring a JWT?
So it's not, from the authorization perspective, it's not, right? So on our end, we're still storing all the sessions, but you on the front end don't have to worry about storing the sessions or storing the sessions on your side of your back end. So rather than you getting the token and seeing if it's still valid, you can trust the token that you get from Auth0.
Yeah, because that kind of defeats the point. The whole point of JWT is a bearer token, and then you didn't have to track session.
Right.
So but then if you're locked in session and you're not tracking the JWT anymore, it kind of gets rid of some of those comments.
Right, it does. And yeah, one of the big things was that you can use JSON Web Tokens as totally stateless. They have all the information, but in reality, like in the state of when you need to revoke a token, if you're not keeping some type of session, if you don't have a way to identify these tokens, then a malicious user with a stolen token can do a whole lot of damage. And the only remedy is to change your signing key, and that logs everybody else out. So that's not a good experience either.
Sorry, I think I kind of missed something. So the application is not keeping the token, right? The sessions of the OAuth.
Right. Your application, your specific application is not going to keep the token.
So it doesn't have anything.
It shouldn't. So, like you can, and a lot of our demos actually still say to like store them in local storage so that you can access them easily, but you shouldn't do it that way.
So does the user have to keep on logging in?
No, they're not. So there's another method that you can call to a secured authorization service that's going to check to see if the user should be logged in, and then it's going to issue a new JSON Web token. I know it's still kind of it's kind of hard to explain without having like a full application front end that I could walk you through.
So base 64 encoded JSON instead of something like ASN1, was it just mostly for being more comfortable for developers? I mean, like in the past for non-web things,
Right.
ASN1 is usually how you would do something like this for server-to-server communication, things
Mhm.
like that. Like, was it web friendliness or
It's mainly web friendliness because usually JSON Web Tokens are used like within the browser and server, so they're not as much used in server-to-server communications.
Yeah.
They're more used in browser-to-server communications, so it makes it a little bit easier because you could also transfer the tokens via the URL in a query string if you wanted to. It's not recommended, but you technically could.
Yeah.
So it's just user friendliness and web friendliness. Cool. Well, thank you guys so much, and I think we have another talk coming up.
Yeah, this will maybe take like a couple minute break while you get set up. But Corey's going to do a little talk on Buffalo web development, so this is going to be kind of cool tonight. But in the meantime, if y'all want to, go to the bathroom, get some beers, some water, get some pizza. Like I think there's some money left, so we'll just take 2 minutes. Switch
Yeah, this was just the original Smooth code. I actually don't even remember setting that up. This is I can look that up as well. It's an operator model. I think it's this bracket pair for PSL.
You're also doing fun about your own.
Yep, it's a bracket pair colorizer.
store that in the time. That's how we do that. But how does that, I mean, I think that's like, even if it's not just the, so the doing that, what it went to is, we are not showing you that the name on the client side, right? Just like on back.
So in that filter that you store, shows what you have to store, like, things like the data, the topic of fake documents,
No, so it's just like random. Whenever they log out, like they log out on our front end, so that we send a request to the back end. Okay, on the back end, so we did that one there.
So in that case, like you mentioned, you get fundraising, you have something that you can store some data in the payload, but if you don't have a use case for it, then stories are not
Okay. Even if you use the example that you mentioned, like you said, store token on SBA and then search for the back end and then some way of Twitter is more fast. How Twitter is on Twitter and upload like you just some information. Is there that's what I mean? That's kind of using for me, that is data with your idea that you can see that you
it's just a schema, so it can be many types of
Check to see
It's like bumping a boost.
yeah, it actually happened every sections there.
Yeah, I would have thought so, right? Because it's been
Yeah, I think they were watching it for a while, because a lot of people have a problem, like, really traveling around, they were looking, and me, I don't start my dad's really. It's crazy, like, we sell fireworks, so like, 4th of July, sell fireworks, crazy, and like, we're in the middle of here.
Right, y'all boarded it up.
Well, and there's nothing like when you start working, getting randomly selected, you have your laptop tested for I just spent 30 days, no, I was storing this laptop, it's got that's awesome, right? I'm looking, like, okay, you're clear to go, like, okay, I have nothing.
Hey, try to travel all the way. I got everything from rubber.
Well, I travel so many vendors for training. They pull my bag every single time for carry on. We have a big one. It's got a lot of
Yeah, I had this like it's a plastic box, top secret with like all of this circuitry.
It's
Well, like the funny thing was these four ounce bottle of which was only half full. No, that was right.
You know, JavaScript has a lot of expressions for it.
Here's all that swag.
Alright, but if I leave it here like it's say,
I'll make this quick.
Funny, there's a lot of things to try to talk about this year.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, it's wonderful.
Alright. Okay, so, get started?
Yeah, absolutely.
Alright, fantastic. Alright, my name is Corey Lanoux. I work for Go for Guides. Mark Bates and I do some training for Go. You might have heard of this, you might not, that's okay. This is super cool. I happened to be in town for training for one of my corporate clients, and I noticed that the meetup was going on, so I completely crashed the meetup, so thanks for letting me do that. For compensation, I brought a bag of Go swag, alright, that I'm gonna hand out, so hopefully I'll be forgiven. The coolest thing is the fidget spinners, but they're bottle openers.
all about this.
Oh my God.
All about this.
So I'm going to briefly go over Go Buffalo tonight. It actually, I think, kind of goes pretty well with the talk already because it was the JWT and Auth0. So let's talk about Buffalo. Buffalo is something that Mark Bates has been working on probably for over a year now. Mark Bates has been doing web development probably forever. I got my start to Go with web development, so I'm pretty familiar with the topic. So first of all, let's just agree to some basics when it comes to web development, okay? Web applications are not simple, right? All of this stuff we have to deal with for just any basic web applications. And when you talk to people in the Go community about, hey, what should I use to write my web app? They take this really snobbish attitude. They're like, just use a standard library. You don't need anything else. And it's like, you know what? That's kind of true, and I did a lot of web development in Go when I got started. And it was all with the standard library, and that's fine. But suddenly we ended up using Gorilla Mux. And pretty soon you start going on the line and you're like, oh, I'm using a lot of things. And then you go to build your next web application and you do it all over again, right? Well, and there's all these frameworks out there. And the problem is they're frameworks. But let's talk about when you should actually use the standard library. You should use it if you actually just want to understand how it works in Go, right? That's a good premise for it. If you're going to build a really small API, that's another reason you should use the standard library. Or you're just going to embed a web application inside another tool, and you don't want all the dependencies. If you're doing anything beyond that, don't just use the standard library. You got to find something better, right? Like, that's a lot of work. So, what is Buffalo? Buffalo is basically a holistic approach to rapid web development ecosystem. I want to be really clear about what Buffalo is. Buffalo is not a framework. It is an ecosystem. Okay, that's a big difference. Rails is a framework. Buffalo is not. Almost all the other ones we've talked about here tonight, like you've got Bigo, Gin, all those, nothing wrong with them, but they are frameworks, right? You're going to have to live within their confines. Where Buffalo is more of an ecosystem. And it's got all the things that you need for fairly complex web applications, routing, templating, database, asset management, task scripting, migrations, the whole works. It has a lot of stuff. It solves the majority of it through code generation, which is a completely different thing. So it generates all the scaffolding for you, and then you own the code, right? But you don't have to sit there and create your boilerplate over and over and over. So how is it different? It's similar to Rails and to Django, especially from a rapid standpoint. It sets up all your front end. So, modern web development, let's face it, you can't escape things like Node, NPM, things like that. You just can't, not for modern web development. It reduces all your boilerplate code. It compiles down to a single binary, including all of your static assets, right? So the one thing about Go that we always love is when we compile to a single binary and we deploy it, but we all know when we have a website, suddenly we're stuck with JavaScript, images, and all this kind of stuff too, right? So Buffalo has a package manager that takes that whole thing and bundles it all up into one single binary for distribution. So that's super cool, makes your life really easy there.
Which lib do y'all use for that? If I can interrupt you for a second. Is that Rice or Jamie D wrote one? I'm trying to remember.
The packaging?
Yeah, for the single binary, like actually shoving your assets into the executable.
Yeah, there's a couple of them. It's the one that Mark uses as Packer, and I don't know if he wrote that one or if he borrowed it from somewhere else. The thing to understand about Buffalo, and this is what Mark tells me all the time, he did not reinvent the wheel here. He basically went out and found the best of all the libraries out there and said, let's put all these together and use them, right? Gorilla Mux is the router that's in here. You'll find there's actually a shoulders file, shoulders.markdown file in Buffalo repo that lists all of the major repos that he's using to create this thing and bring it together, right? So it's already a lot of best practices that are in play out there. So the nice thing about using Buffalo is you basically just start writing business logic almost right away. And who ever spent like times writing Rails apps here? Anybody? Did you ever like the fact that if you just need to prototype something really quick, you just do Rails G and give it like an entire resource and bang, there's the whole thing? I'm going to show you what to do that tonight. All right, and it's simple to use. This thing right here that I'm showing you, this is a Buffalo app, right? So it can be anything. And our entire training platform that we teach off of at all our corporate trainings is a Buffalo app. So how cool is that? All right, so installation for Buffalo is literally a go get command, right? Just like it is for all things Go. Also, if you need to support SQLite, it's recently changed so we don't have to support CGO. You can use it via tags. And this made it much more portable on all the different platforms. Otherwise, they had the SQLite by default, which is a CGO binding that's really kind of a pain cross-platform. So we got rid of that. Hopefully you don't use SQLite. But if you just want to use Postgres or whatever, the first one's going to work just fine for you. So, the Buffalo command has all kinds of stuff. I mean, it's kind of like the Swiss Army knife of commands for everything you need. It's got the build, it's got the DB ones, like Buffalo DB, migrate, drop, create, like you name it, does all that stuff for you. Migrations, by the way, it is so refreshing to have that in Go again. It is fantastic. I mean, I forget who wrote the actual library, but Buffalo brings it right with it. Generate, which is all your generate for scaffolding. Buffalo New actually creates a new Buffalo application, all kinds of stuff. So all kinds of stuff in here. And I'm going to go into a demo after this, but if you need help, obviously dash help. Go Buffalo IO site. This is the site right there. Tons of stuff out here, tons of video. Mark has put a lot of work into the documentation. The docs are really, really good actually. And I think right now they're being translated in like, I don't know how many different languages. I think there's in French, Spanish, a whole bunch of different languages already. So the international community is definitely picking up Buffalo. So that's pretty cool to see. Who's on the Gopher Slack here? Anybody on Gopher Slack? Yes, love that. There's a Buffalo channel. Mark lives in this channel. I swear to good God, he never goes to sleep. He's always there. He's there. And don't get me wrong, he gets frustrated sometimes. He's always like, he'll private message me, do these people ever read the docs? I'm like, you know you're an open source developer, right? Like this is what you condemned yourself to. Answering questions that are already in the docs. That's what you do as an open source maintainer. So, but if you need help, Mark will help you. He's always out there. He's a great guy. So with that, let's actually do an actual application. So most people, when they demo something, they do hello world, right? But in web application, it's the to-do app, right? That's what we always do. We don't do hello world, we do to-do. So let's go ahead and say Buffalo, new, and we'll just call it to-do. So this is going to go ahead and basically create everything we need. So see, it's creating assets, creates our file icon, application.js. It's using your yarn right now. We've got Webpack set up. Anybody use Webpack here? Yes? Okay. So this is kind of like pretty modern stuff out here, especially front end. I'm not a front end developer. I hate that stuff. Okay, I'm going to be honest. I really do. But I have to do it once in a while. Okay, so there basically we have that generated. If I just do this right quick, kind of show you what it did here. Here is everything that it just generated, right? It generated quite a bit of stuff for us. There's a lot of stuff there. It has a database YAML file. It's got inflections. Grifs are basically rate tasks in Go. So you can write all your own tasks if you want, which is really nice. Your locales, your main.go entry point. It's got models that's going to be in there. Your public stuff, your templates, your lock files, the whole works, right? So this is literally what we just generated, right? But we own all this code. We're not in a framework. We can do anything we want to this code that we want. So the first thing we have to do now is, let's go into the actual directory, is we want to generate a new resource. So Buffalo G resource. Oops. G resource. And let's call it tasks. We're going to give it a name, and we're going to give it a done flag. We're going to call it bool. And went ahead and it created. Did that create everything I wanted to? Minimize this a little bit. Can't see that. There. All right. So it went ahead and created the actual all these tasks right here. So if you look at what it created the actions, the templates, and it created an actual migration as well. And it actually tells us, oh, by the way, does it say where we should actually run the migration? It doesn't. But it did create the migrations right there. So I know at this point I probably have to do a little bit of magic. Let's see, I probably need to do Buffalo BB create, actually create the database, and then I probably need to do migrate up so it can migrate the new task that I just created. Okay, I've got that. And now if I do Buffalo dev, that's going to start up the actual Buffalo development service right there. So I come over here, my local host, refresh this, it's still actually packing assets. So there we go. So there is the actual application that just generated, yes.
I noticed it generated a document file too.
Ooh, did it? That's pretty cool. He does a lot of stuff, right? Like he's trying to make you like a responsible developer. So yeah, I don't know what's in that one. I'll have to take a look. So by default, what he does is he actually lists out all of your routes. And just like in Rails, like when you have a problem and like something breaks, he lists out all the session information, all the parameters that came through, everything. It's actually super cool. But by default, he does this. I finally convinced him that he should make these actually clickable. And he's like, well, not all the RESTful stuff's clickable. I'm like, we'll make the ones that aren't clickable, right? So I can come in here and just start using stuff. So now I can come in here and click on task. Very simple, right? I got some basic CRUD stuff that gets generated for me. Create a new task. Demo a Buffalo app at a meetup. All right. Go ahead and click save. Got my basic things there. Back to all tasks. There it is. You know what? I think I just did this. Save it. Done, right? So from the time you heard about Buffalo, I can install it, I can generate it, and I'm actually working with it very quickly. I own all of the code for this. So all of my CRUD is there, all my basic boilerplate code is there. This is pretty easy to use. I'm not going to go further into all the stuff you can do with it because frankly, if you're interested in Buffalo, it's all right here. There's basically, we can talk on it right here. He's got a whole bunch of videos on it. Yes?
Okay, so, because you said that, I have been like deep in POP for about 3 weeks for work.
POP is awesome.
POP is awesome, and there's a link both here and on the POP repo called the unofficial POP book, which I'm ready to PR the shit out of with all the things I've learned that were in this unofficial POP book. And Mark has told me that he's not sure how I would do that. And I call BS because I'm ready to be like, here's some knowledge that I have gleaned from my 3 weeks. And since I got you here as captain of the audience, reverse audience speaker, you know how I can PR the unofficial POP book so that I can at least propose to add some
Is it just a Git
knowledge.
book?
It's apparently a Git book. The link from that is broken. And the link to it on the POP website takes you there, but it's super bare.
Yeah, I mean, Mark didn't know the guy wrote it. Like, literally, somebody wrote a book on POP. Now, if you're not sure what POP is, POP is basically the ORM that he wrote to basically handle getting data in and out of Postgres. And basically, you just create a model, and it just links everything. And it is super cool. It has like the get one, get many, the has one, the has many, like all that stuff you had in Rails. I mean, you could put together incredibly powerful queries, and it writes really efficient queries. It's effectively the active record of Go. So the only thing, quite frankly, that made Rails successful, in my opinion, was active record. If it wasn't for active record, Rails would have sucked, right?
By adoption, work is the active record of Go. But
Correct.
I agree with POP, but what I'm saying is that I'm not trying to put you on the spot. Like, I want to write like several pages of that are missing.
And Mark wants you to write them.
But he doesn't know how I can, and it's linked from his official docs and the official POP repo, so I want to figure out how I can help solve it.
I'll pass for him.
Alright.
Yeah.
Because I asked him, and he was like, yeah, I don't know about that, it's somewhere out there.
Yeah. You know, I mean,
Okay, I don't know.
he gets so many requests right now. Like, he is actually overwhelmed at how successful and how quickly Buffalo was taking off. I mean, it was kind of a pet project, and the amount of contributions now, I mean, he's doing a release almost every month at this point.
Yeah.
And it is not a small amount of functionality that's added every month. It is massive how much functionality is being added.
And he's doing an amazing job keeping up with it, and the whole, like, UID debacle, which was pretty awesome to watch. And, yeah, and I am you know, I just want to basically PR some, like, I found some corner cases that aren't really problems, they're just like stuff that's not necessarily documented, and I'm ready to kind of like write that out a little bit, and I was like, we're ready to use.
And I'm in the same boat as you. Like when I used Pop. I didn't use Buffalo, but I used Pop for a project I recently worked on for another company. And all the stuff I'm like, hey Mark, how do you do this? Like, oh, you do this. I'm like, you know, it's not your docs. Yeah, I know we gotta document that. I'm like,
right.
Do you know if people just knew about Pop, they would adopt Pop probably before Buffalo in their projects. Because I'm using Pop in a ton of projects without Buffalo.
Yeah, I'm using it with GoKit, and like I had this like idiot moment where I couldn't, for some reason, you may have seen my basics that I exposed it to the world, but I couldn't figure out how to change scopes. For some reason, it wasn't connecting in my head. And I figured it out as I wrote some more like inline docs for it, and then like I was messed up by the fact that like when the validate comes back from Pop, it's all been down case and snake case instead of whatever I said it is, and that could be the inline docs like right? Like, and I get it, he does like a million things, he versions his stuff properly. Let's just take a moment to appreciate that and go a little bit. But yes, I want to PR his book, but it's not his book.
I've basically touched on like this much of Buffalo, and it's not Rails, but it's gonna get there. I mean, it is very rapid web development. You can make stuff very, very quickly. He's working on a new tool right now called Crudite that basically, if you just need, like, think of active admin for Rails, that's basically Crudite, right? So you don't even have to generate any of your scaffolding. You can just give it your resource, and it'll go ahead and create all the CRUD for you from an admin panel, right? So all that stuff's getting there. And to add into that, Mark uses Goth as the provider for all of the multi-provider authentication in Go. And guess what Goth supports? That's right, Auth0. See? I tied it all together. So that's really all I've got. This is who I am. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, tweet at me, whatever. Mark Bates is the genius behind Buffalo, though, so be sure to give him a shout out if you like it. That's really all I've got. Any questions? Yes?
So I'm kind of intrigued about the idea of like code generation, so you're generating the whole framework into your code base. Like what does it look like in 2 years when you've built this app and it's working, but then you need to go back to it and add functionality, and there's all this new functionality that's been added to the core to Buffalo.
So Mark is trying to make sure we don't break backward compatibility, right? And we're not even at 1.0 yet, so some things are breaking as we go along the way. But at the end of the day, most of the concepts of the stuff really isn't going to change. If anything, if you're using it today, he's just going to have more helper style stuff in the future, right? There's going to be easier ways to do things, and they might generate differently. But what's really cool about this is if you download Buffalo, and I've already had this happen where I've got Buffalo running and I've got all my stuff generated, and then I update Buffalo and now it generates a newer type of resource. It's still compatible with all the resources I still have. It just might be written in a newer style, and you own the code. So some of it could be painful because we're moving pretty rapidly right now, but at some point it's going to stabilize pretty quickly. But I know what you're saying, right? From a code generation standpoint, it can move out from underneath you with newer generators. So the goal is to try to make it backward compatible as much as possible and avoid having you to ever have to redo anything. But again, most of it is boilerplate, and it's just really your business logic that you're writing at this point. That's all you have to worry about. And again, we wrote the entire, our entire platform on it, right, for Gopher Guides. And we literally had this up and running, including all the training material that we do, in a weekend. I mean, this was trivial. It probably took more for us to tweak the front end than it did to put the back end stuff together, which is always the case. And that's really where you want to be. Any other questions? Yes?
If I use like a NoSQL database joining.
There's a Mongo plugin I believe you can use for this too. I don't know how the generators work for that, I have to check, but I know that more and more support is coming for that. Because the generators basically, they know what types of resources you're using. I don't know if anybody's used it with it, and I'll ask Mark for sure. But I'm pretty sure he will support Mongo at some point, if not. It's all via plugin architecture, the way Buffalo actually works. So people are writing new technology plugins all the time for Buffalo. And it's crazy the type of support they're getting for it sometimes. I don't know if it's there yet, but it wouldn't surprise me it will come at some point.
Like how efficient the queries would be, for example, where you don't have any joins or anything, right? So it's up to the application developer how efficient you can query, like for example.
Yeah, I suspect if you wanted to use like a document database, you wouldn't use POP for that, right? You'd probably use some other replacement.
And it might literally just be writing your own layer to it. Because actually writing the stuff for document databases is pretty straightforward. I've used MongoDB quite a bit with Go, and there's actually not a lot of layer there. It's pretty straightforward. You give it the struct, you tell it you want it all loaded to the struct as a slice, and that's kind of end of story. Anybody else? Awesome. Well, hey, thanks so much. I'm going to be around. Come find me, get this swag.
Thanks for coming, everybody. You're all welcome to just hang around for the next 20, 30 minutes. Please finish your pizza. There's definitely more here. Help yourself.
Oh, thanks. Hey, thanks for coming around.
Boys, and if you could just go out there, open the door right here, because they're gonna have a bunch of like pitches and whatever. I'm not asking you to do that. Yeah, so that's one